In July of 2026, we're experiencing an astrological configuration that's believed by some to be the dawn of a great new civilization, and by others, not so much. In either case, this basket configuration we're experiencing with the outer planets in July is highly unique, unlike anything that we've seen before in recent history. And it will almost certainly have far-reaching implications for humanity as a whole. Here to help us understand how this unprecedented series of transits will impact the collective is mundane astrologer Dan Waits from World Astrology Report. And welcome back, Dan. Thank you so much for being with us again.
Oh, thank you for having me again, Heather. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, and this time we're talking about something super interesting. We have kind of a strange configuration coming up in July, and it's very much unlike anything that I've ever seen personally. I don't know about you and the research that you've done, but we have two minor triangles that are sort of converging to create this sort of basket formation that people are talking about and calling Barbault Basket. I know you did a whole video about this already on your channel, but let's dive into kind of what this looks like in terms of the configuration first, and then we can start to pick it apart because there's just like a lot to unpack with this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty remarkable configuration, and I don't think I can find anything at all in history that's quite like it, honestly. I've looked back for a good few thousand years, looking at previous times when you might have seen something like this, and we have seen similar astrology before, but what's special about the astrology in July is that the configuration is so perfect. We have all these planets at 4 degrees of their signs. So we have Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto at 4 degrees of Gemini, Aries, and Aquarius, respectively, in this configuration that's called a minor grand trine.
Yeah.
And then we also have Jupiter reaching 4 degrees of Leo and opposing Pluto. And I think what is really unique about it is the kind of perfection of it, the tightness of the aspects, because you just don't really see that if you look back.
Well, and all of these sextiles and trines are coming exact in that minor triangle within this like 2-week period of time. And the same thing with the second triangle that's being sort of instigated by Jupiter. So we have this period from the 15th through the 24th where everything is coming exact all at once, which, yeah, again, this is significant because I've never seen anything like this. You just said you looked back a couple thousand years and couldn't find it. My software couldn't find it either. And so we're kind of in uncharted territory.
We kind of are. I think that's pretty fair to say. And it makes it a little bit difficult to make predictions about stuff like this because, history only has one run that we get to look back in. And if you look back and you can't find anything like it, then you're in uncharted territory and you just have to try and figure things out using the symbols and things that were similar in the past and looking at what's happening now and trying to make sort of sensible interpretations based on what's going on. But yeah, it's extremely rare, and in terms of the tightness of the aspects, pretty much unprecedented.
And these aspects too are, for the most part, harmonious. I mean, we do have an opposition between Jupiter and Pluto in July that I think is going to be a little bit intense. Like, I think that's going to be where the friction is. But everything else seems to be in sextile and in trine with one another. And I know one of the big predictions is that this is some sort of like dawn of a new age where everything is going to be, glorious all of a sudden. And it doesn't seem like that is necessarily where we're at. So first off, let's get a backdrop on that interpretation and what your take on that is.
Yes, there've been a lot of really, really positive interpretations of this astrology. And one of the reasons for that, I think, as you say, there are these harmonious aspects between the 3 outermost planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. We've got a trine between Uranus and Pluto. We've got a sextile between Uranus and Neptune, and another sextile between Neptune and Pluto. And generally speaking, we astrologers, all things being equal, we like sextiles and trines, right? We like harmonious aspects. They tend to express themselves relatively smoothly and comfortably, and they offer support. And generally speaking, when you see trines and sextiles, you don't expect things to go majorly wrong. However, there's there's a bit more, I think, to think about here, because these planets are really signifiers of great change. I think they're very powerful signifiers of kind of generational change. So when they're in harmonious aspects to each other, I think we might be in maybe dodgy territory if we start to assume, well, that means, everything's great and it's a golden age and all of that kind of thing. Just because these are trines and sextiles, it doesn't necessarily equal quote unquote good, whatever you consider that to mean. So you asked about some of the predictions about this astrology, and I think the predictions about this astrology that have become really well known are those of the French astrologer André Barbault, who's a late astrologer. He died in 2019, but he was a very well-known and accomplished astrologer who did a lot of really important work in pioneering certain approaches to mundane astrology. And so he's a bit of a legendary figure in astrology. He correctly predicted the pandemic, I think back in 2011, way before it actually happened, although he didn't see it, didn't live to see that prediction come true. So he has, a lot of people respect Barbault, and he had some really positive things to say about this astrology. If you want, I can read out what he said. Would that be helpful, Heather?
I think that would, yeah, because not everyone's familiar with this prediction.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have some of this stuff in front of me, so I can actually just read out a couple of quotes on what Barbault said about this astrology many years in advance. So one of the quotes is from his book, Planetary Cycles, Mundane Astrology. And he said, "It is the most benefic configuration of the century, and its interplanetary partnership will work for the best in a splendid relaunch of civilization. It contains a harmonious relationship between primordial opposites, the coming together of the external and the internal, rational and spiritual, mind and soul, human beings surpassing themselves while experiencing life on a higher level." And that's, it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I don't know about you, but I quite like the sound of that. I hope that is what we see in July. But, as I think probably a lot of people are thinking, well, that's not really where we are. And it doesn't quite feel like that's where we've come to. Actually, I have another quote from Barbault on the same astrology, which I think is a bit more accurate about where we are. And maybe I can just quickly read this one as well. It's just another short quote. He said, "The new world civilization, the beginnings of which appeared around the year 2000, is in full flight here. This entry into the second quarter of the century bears the stamp of the achievement of a new age of humanity. The central and harmonic position of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is especially expressive of a promotion of the lowest strata of the world population, a significant rise in the standard of living of the poor, a victory over misery won in unprecedented solidarity." Now, again, this is probably overstating things a little bit, but I think that Barbault was much more on the money in this particular quote, because he says that this astrology bears the stamp of the achievement of a new age of humanity. He's not saying a new age begins now. He's saying kind of this is fruition of things that have already been in process for quite a long time. And I think that's much more accurate, because if you break down the cycles of these individual planets, you'll see that these are cycles that began decades ago. So we're seeing right now the fruition of things that have been developing for a long time. And I think he's also right to say that he says a promotion of the lowest strata of the world population. We have seen people all over the world, all over the global south, grow in wealth quite considerably. And there's been quite a considerable balancing between the wealth levels in the so-called developed world versus the global south or developing world, or whatever you want to call it. There's been a much more of a kind of balancing that's happened. And so something that occurs to me is that I think Barbault is kind of right about that. If you look at surveys of the global population, you find that there is actually quite a lot of optimism in the air in quite a lot of countries in certain parts of the world, parts of Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, parts of the world that were formerly relatively poor compared to the developed world, as it's sometimes called. So I think that's kind of interesting. And there's a lot more pessimism right now in parts of, say, in the US or in Europe or in the parts of the world that, say, developed and got rich first. And I wonder if that's kind of exactly what you'd expect in a world where sort of wealth is sort of rebalanced a bit. Then there's a
Yeah.
relative decline on the part of the more developed parts. So that's why I think, in part, there's more pessimism in certain parts of the world and optimism in others. But generally speaking, perhaps Barbault was kind of on the money with that second quote.
Yeah, and I would say that most people wouldn't argue that we're not entering into a new phase of humanity. Like everything is changing really dramatically, sort of all at once, especially with like new technology and AI and all of these other things. What I wonder though, and like you have a better handle on his work, obviously, and you do mundane astrology. I wonder if he was looking at this configuration within the context of the whole, because if you took just this basket configuration and looked at it separately from everything else, yeah, you could say that this is like the most glorious thing that has happened and that will happen. But if you look at it in the context of we just came from that Saturn Neptune conjunction, we came from that stellium in Aries, like shit hit the fan. We're still dealing with the ramifications of that. Like it doesn't just disappear. Even when the astrology itself separates, we still have to deal with what the astrology brought about in our world. And then we're also building toward a bunch of other chaos that's starting to have that like beginning ripple effect. So, yes, yeah, there's all these different supportive aspects and supportive energies, but that doesn't erase everything.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And I think something that a lot of us were seeing when we looked at 2026 in advance is that we thought that the first part of the year was going to be really intense,
Yeah.
and that there were a lot of war signals, which obviously I think it's fair to say has come to pass with what we just saw in the Middle East. So it looked really kind of chaotic and harsh. And then there's other, as you mentioned, there's other stuff coming a bit later in the year, which brings the chaos back. And we've got eclipse season coming in August as well, which is probably already starting to make itself felt, or will be in July anyway. But yeah, then you have this kind of part of the year where these mostly harmonious aspects
Mhm.
are in play, and it feels a little bit less violent. Although, having said that, we do have a Mars-Uranus conjunction at the start of July, and those tend to be pretty volatile and violent themselves. But yeah, I don't think Barbault was probably factoring all of that in. He wasn't really thinking exactly how is it going to feel for people at this stage in the year. He's looking big picture
Mhm.
and looking at, as you say, at these whole cycles, which have been in development for a long time, right? The Pluto-Neptune cycle, which I personally, in my work, I've kind of focused on as being kind of like the master cycle, since it's the slowest and most powerful. That takes us back to the 1890s when the last
Yeah.
conjunctions happened. So there's what we're watching emergent now has kind of been in development since that time.
Yeah, and it's not something that happens all at once either. And that's the other thing. Like this is, yeah, a point of convergence where everything is sort of amplified and it's sort of like a catalyst moment because of that Jupiter configuration coming in and hitting everything. But that's just a one-time pass. We have that Neptune Pluto sextile, that's 6 years long. Like this is the first pass of that. We have like the entire rest of the configuration is going to last like 2 to 3 years on top of that. And so what we're seeing right now, it's almost like an initiation into something as opposed to the entire thing. And so I think we shouldn't expect like everything to happen all at once. And I do think that there's potential for positivity. Sextiles are different than trines, you know? And so we have 4 sextiles and then 2 trines. Sextiles need to be activated to actually bring about something positive. Like sextiles are an energy that is not as harmonious. It doesn't work on its own in the same way that trines do. And at least in personal astrology, when you see that there's a sextile, you know that there's something that you have to take hold of. There's something you need to take action on. There's something you need to do to stimulate that energy. And usually you're not going to really take advantage of it unless there is friction, right? And so I'm wondering if more on a global scale, because there is so much friction, we might be taking more advantage of the sextile energy. I don't know. Anyway, if you have any thoughts on that.
Could be. It's difficult to say. I wouldn't be hugely surprised if July ends up maybe not quite meeting people's expectations in terms of how remarkable it is. I mean, it could be, but sometimes these kind of really talked about configurations, especially when they involve sextiles, trines, and so forth, they can pass by without being, without big drama, as you might expect. As you also said, though, I think the thing here that may actually mean we do really see some significant stuff happening is this Jupiter-Pluto opposition. And one place that I'd be looking to for big news, big drama perhaps, is financial markets and the sort of monetary system. Jupiter and Pluto together are a classic signature of big money. And you see them together either conjunction or making aspects, close aspects in the charts of all sorts of billionaires, banks, financial institutions. Is a very kind of telling signature that something is going on that involves big amounts of cash. And, an opposition, this is it's a tense, hard aspect. So there could be some issues there. I'm wondering, perhaps, one possibility that comes to mind is this kind of time going to be seen as a real, almost kind of high point for the sort of AI frothy markets or something of that kind. And maybe things go completely bananas and reach some kind of peak or high in July. I could see something like that happening. And then say the energies kind of change once Jupiter passes that opposition with Pluto and enters its waning phase of its own cycle with Pluto.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And the last time we had the Pluto Jupiter conjunction was at the start of the pandemic, and there was massive financial change. I think it was like one of the biggest like redistributions of wealth that we've seen in history, with the exception of 2008, which also had a Jupiter Pluto conjunction just before the housing market collapsed. And
Right.
so how does this kind of connect to that?
Yeah, exactly. That's I think exactly the thing to think about, because we can always have an idea of what two planets are doing in a cycle by looking back to what they did when they made previous aspects, and particularly the conjunction. And we had Jupiter-Pluto conjunctions over 2020. As you mentioned, we have the Fed buying up corporate debt. And this conjunction, by the way, was in Capricorn, right? The sign of established institutions. And they were basically bailed out by the system and by the Federal Reserve and all the money that was printed and so forth at that time, at the expense of everybody else pretty much, because we got massive inflation, small businesses suffered, etc. So as you say, it was a transfer of wealth upwards. And so we can be thinking about some of these themes in July. It's difficult to know exactly how it's going to play out. We've seen an absolute ton of money injected into the system since 2020, obviously even going further back to 2008. And yeah, there's something here. There's some kind of turning point coming in, perhaps in terms of how they've been kind of trying to keep the whole system afloat over the past few years. I have to emphasize, I'm not a financial astrologer, so my understanding of this stuff is not as deep as some of the people who really focus on this stuff. But you can kind of have an idea that somehow these themes are going to come up, because we've got Jupiter-Pluto reaching their opposition, calling back to 2020, and where we saw this kind of tsunami of money entering the system and these corporate bailouts and so forth. So yeah, there's something interesting coming here. But I also think that probably that opposition is also serving to further what is being transformed and the new system that's coming online. Because I think this minor grand trine configuration, so the Uranus, Neptune, Pluto part of it, is probably signifying the emergence of new kinds of society that are probably, you could say, AI based, or like the digital nervous system that's basically expanded over the whole Earth over the course of this Pluto Neptune cycle, and then these other cycles have kind of furthered that. We've kind of got this global digital nervous system now, and AI has just emerged recently as the kind of brain of that system. And I think part of what this astrology signifies is the emergence of these kind of technology controlled systems that are a kind of new form of governance, basically. that we haven't really seen before. But it's kind of, this stuff has been talked about for a very long time, and it's kind of coming to fruition now. And perhaps somehow, yeah, that Jupiter-Pluto opposition may be a trigger in the process of the emergence of that. But as you mentioned earlier, this Pluto-Neptune sextile, this is just the first year, and they're going to do this every year but from now until 2032. So as you say, there's a process of emergence here, which we are at the start of the final phase of, I think is the best way to put it.
Okay. And that kind of makes sense too, thinking back to the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, because that was everybody being removed from society and everyone was online and focused on what's happening like here in our computer screen. And also all of the transactions became more digital because you couldn't go to like an actual store. Some stores didn't have, there was like a coins shortage in the United States, which was super weird. And like, so people weren't accepting cash, and sometimes people didn't accept cash because they didn't want to get a virus on the cash. And it was just like this really weird thing where, yeah, a lot of our transactions became way more digital and way more controllable just from that simple fact that we weren't like out and about like spending cash in the world anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're also watching emergent right now are these central bank digital currencies in a lot of countries. And then in the US, they are using so-called stable coins, which are basically cryptocurrencies that are pegged to the value of the dollar or some other currency. And so the US is kind of trying to transition towards, or at least bring in the use of these stable coins, and to encourage also the whole world to eventually use them. I think that's the plan. They want to essentially try to prop up the dollar using stable coins to kind of stimulate demand for dollars around the world. And so this is also something to watch, I think. There's obviously a big push towards digital currency at the moment. And as you mentioned, that, the events of 2020 and where we had this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction really helped to kind of push us towards that. And so, yeah, we could well see events coming that kind of further that in July somehow. I'll be watching news for what happens to financial systems, what stuff is announced. I think that's kind of part of where a lot of the major news is going to be.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. Is there anything else with Pluto and Jupiter that we need to kind of chat about before we move on?
Pluto and Jupiter, I mean, as an aspect,
Yeah.
big money,
Yeah.
big money, yeah, is kind of what you often see. And then also kind of big ambition as well. And
especially in Leo.
Yeah, especially in Leo. It's kind of interesting to see this sort of Leo activation with Pluto in Aquarius. And I think it's really interesting to have that polarity activated in a really strong way, because we've also got eclipses coming into Leo in August. On the 12th of August, we have our first Leo eclipse as well. And Leo is an interesting sign to be activating right now at this time where we're watching all these kind of technological systems being rolled out, and it's all very Aquarian, isn't it? And yet Leo is the opposing sign that's more about the authentic self and creativity and the inner child and all those kind of things that say can get perhaps swamped or neglected by abstract technological systems thinking. So it's interesting that Leo is now kind of getting this activation. And I'll also be kind of looking to see what kind of things happen to the realm of creativity and celebrity and things of that kind. We could see some interesting developments, I think, in the next few weeks.
Yeah, that makes sense too. And Pluto does tend to bring extremes, especially when Jupiter's involved. So I wonder what some of the I don't know, celebrity gossip and things that are going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be too surprised. Some celebrities, they do have astrological advisors, and I'd be interested to see which of them are kind of using this big astrology to roll stuff out in July. I wouldn't be too surprised if there could be a few. I mean, that Jupiter-Pluto opposition is pretty powerful, and it kind of says to me great ambition, but then also the kind of ambition that can stimulate opposition to your plans as well. So I think you have to be kind of quite brave to like lean into that astrology, but I wouldn't be surprised if some people do it.
Yeah. Well, like big ambition and big drama, right?
Yeah,
And that's how you make headlines. So we'll see.
that's true. That's true. Yeah, it might be worth it.
Okay, and so we have that, and then we have the Neptune sextile to Pluto. So we talked about 1891, 1892. That's the last time that we had the conjunction. We've had a few sextiles since then. What have you found in your research is connected to this part of the configuration?
Yeah, I've done a lot. My main focus of research over the past few years has been this Pluto Neptune cycle. So I've spent so much time thinking about this particular cycle, and as you mentioned, the cycle takes us back to 1891, 1892. That kind of time when a lot of the modern world was kind of being invented, right? We had invention of things like cinema and radio, and the world was being electrified, and we had even a kind of global telegraph network being built at that time as a kind of sort of prototypical internet. So a lot of those themes take us back. A lot of those themes, I think, are being expressed quite right now. But in terms of the sextile itself, the interesting thing about the Pluto-Neptune sextile is that the waxing sextile phase of their synodic cycle, they tend to stay in aspect of sextile, roughly speaking, for about a century. And they've been an aspect of sextile since the 1940s. They have certain periods where they've been making exact sextiles. There's been two previous ones, and we're coming to the third and final one. But they've basically been in aspect for a long time, for almost a century. And so I think that these century-long sextile aspects are actually long kind of processes that culminate at the end. It's kind of like, you know, when you have say an outer planet transit, and it'll be a triple hit transit, like a triple conjunction with a planet in your chart, because of the planet, it makes one pass over a point and then retrogrades and then makes a third and final hit, and that's your kind of transit from that outer planet. It's a little bit like that, I think, but at a kind of massive century-long scale affecting the whole world. So there's something here, I think, about this final phase of this sextile. We might want to think about what emerged in the late 1940s. Right? This is the wake of the Second World War. And this was a really remarkable time, honestly. If you look at that period of about 1945, 1946, 1947, so incredible things were coming at that time. And obviously, we had the end of the Second World War and the use of the nuclear weapons. We also had the emergence of the figure of the UFO into human consciousness. We had the invention of the computer, perhaps most importantly. In 1945, the first computer, the ENIAC, is invented. We have the transistor, which has enabled this digital revolution, invented in 1947. So there's a lot of stuff coming at that time. And we basically have the kind of post-Second World War world emerging at that time. And it hasn't changed that much since then. Of course, there's been changes, but there's some way, I think, in which this next stretch of years that we're going into represents the final phase of emergence of that world. And so I think part of that process is a kind of renegotiation of that Second World War settlement, what kind of came out of that, and the world that was formed at that time. It's being renegotiated now because now there are countries that have risen, I'm thinking here, of course, of countries like China, for example, principally speaking, but many others who have risen greatly in terms of their power and wealth and so forth. So there's a sort of renegotiation happening over this coming period, I think, where that post-Second World War settlement is being renegotiated into I think probably what we call a multipolar world. That's what everybody's describing it as. So I think that's part of what this is going to be about.
Okay. And then, so you're talking about like the 1940s. Wasn't there an exact sextile between Pluto and Neptune in the 50s that happened? And that was in the opposite signs of what it is right now. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I thought that was super interesting.
It's a very interesting observation that I haven't really thought too hard about. But yeah, they made exact sextiles between 1950 and 1956, if I'm not mistaken. And let me just have a quick look at that. Yeah, so Pluto is in Leo, as you say, opposite sign to Aquarius, where it is now. Neptune in Libra, opposite sign to Aries, where it is now. Something that I've been thinking about, okay, well, one of the things that comes to mind here for me is we think about Pluto in Leo, this kind of stretch of the 1940s through the 50s. We're talking here in part about the empowerment of celebrity, this kind of age of celebrity, and you kind of have all these sort of mega stars emerging at that time, and we kind of really enter the age of the global celebrity, I think, at that time. And we also have these other figures, these kind of really central Leo figures who hold a ton of power to themselves. I'm talking here about some of the dictators that were in power at that time. Right? We have Hitler, we have Stalin, we have Mao. I think that's one of the darker sides of Pluto in Leo. But I find it interesting that we've now got Pluto in the opposite side of Aquarius. And something I've been thinking about, it's maybe not a popular view, because I know a lot of people have strong feelings about AI. And I'm, to be very clear, I'm very suspicious of AI as well. And there's a lot of problems with it. And, you know, I totally agree with a lot of the positions people have on it. But I also doubt it's going anywhere. I know it's massively overhyped and blah, blah, blah. But I don't think it's going anywhere, probably. And something that I've been thinking about lately is just how this technology that's emerged has made it so much easier for anyone to be a creator. Soon enough, the AI technology is going to reach the point where some kid who's sitting at home in his parents' basement is going to be able to make an entire movie on his own or her own, right? Just purely using this technology. And it's, I can see why this is a big problem for people who've spent a long time gaining mastery over certain technical skills that are needed in all these kind of things. It's putting those people out of work, and that really sucks. And I can see why people are kind of up in arms about it. But if the technology doesn't go away, and I doubt it will, people are going to be able to start to do a hell of a lot creatively just on their own. And what is the fundamental force behind that creativity? It's your ideas, it's your imagination, it's your creativity. So I'm wondering if Pluto in Aquarius is going to bring this kind of weird inversion of the kind of Pluto in Leo age of celebrity, where kind of everyone can become a creative and a celebrity. And perhaps you're not reaching a huge audience, but we're now in an age where you can make a whole, you could make a song for your partner or something and have it ready for them and play it to them when they come home from work. Or, there's all these kind of possibilities that are kind of interesting with this technology and that speak back to the Pluto in Leo era in certain ways.
That makes sense. So it was like this amplification of celebrity, and now we're in like the decentralization of celebrity through the technology that we have.
Exactly. That's a better way to put it. So we've got Leo is this centralizing sign, and then Aquarius is the decentralizing influence, the network. Yeah, that's exactly what I think.
Well, and that also fits with Barbault's predictions about like kind of the lower rungs of our like economic society, like people that are lower incomes, lower socioeconomic status, kind of getting a more level playing field, because it makes it so, and literally, like you said, some kid in his basement can create a movie and maybe that takes off, or somebody who has very little resources, who is just very intelligent and very creative, can actually make something out of that and they could become a millionaire. Like it really does put resources in the hands of people that wouldn't otherwise have it to do things.
Yeah, I think to some extent it really does. And I think that's something that we should consider. Like, it's tempting to get very down on AI and all the problems and the massive amounts of energy it guzzles, and the creativity it steals from people, and so on and so forth. And I totally get that, but yeah, I think it does also do that. And, in some of these industries, like in the, we all, a lot of people love the movie industry, even though it feels like it's going downhill quite a bit at the moment. But the thing about that industry is it was just completely gatekept and like really hard to get into if you didn't know somebody. All the nepotism, all the casting couch stuff that we saw over the last couple of decades Harvey Weinstein, etc. But even beyond that, just like, if you want to be a movie cameraman and stuff, these kind of jobs go down. They're kind of gate kept and given to passed down through families and networks, and you've got to know people. And it's really hard to break into these things if you're a quote unquote nobody. This technology now is kind of removing some of those barriers. And yeah, again, I mean, we're not quite there yet, but I would not be surprised if people start making some pretty impressive stuff. And what's really impressive about it is just the ideas, the pure ideas, which go way beyond anything that can be gate kept. If you've got the best ideas, if you're really creative and have things to say and things you want to make, like, this technology at least is enabling you to do that. So I think there are some positives to take from this stuff, and I think it's important to kind of hold those positives and negatives in balance, because I think that's the healthiest way to go through life in this society that we live in.
Yeah, and it's not going away. So how can we use it to our benefit, and how can we use it to better our situation, as opposed to, only stressing out about all the evil, diabolical things that are happening. Okay, so we looked at that configuration. So looking at this as a whole with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto together, what are your thoughts on what this is likely to bring about in the next 2 to 3 years? Because that's really when this minor triangle is just exact and really playing out.
Yeah, I think what I'm expecting is really probably the emergence of these kind of new forms of technocratic systems, these new ways that civilization is kind of managed using this technology. And you're kind of watching it now. These things are coming online really quickly. So I think part of what this probably symbolizes is the rollout of all that stuff. Another important factor to bear in mind about this astrology, though, is there's a really strong Gemini signature baked into all of this for two main reasons. The first one is that Uranus is in Gemini, of course, and the second one is that Pluto and Neptune started their current cycle in the sign of Gemini as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So there's so Gemini themes, and here I'm thinking of themes like splits and bifurcations and kind of parallel societies is also a theme to think about. So I don't think, one of the things that I think Barbault didn't maybe get quite right in his forecasts, and of course it's still a bit early to say, we're not in July yet and we haven't got through the end of 2026, but he talked as if it was kind of one civilization that's emerging, but really we live in a world of great bifurcations, splits. And I'm thinking here there are many of them really, but you can think of, firstly, there's a kind of second Cold War going on between the US and China. So that's another kind of great bifurcation of the whole world. But then we also have all these other ways that we're split. We have, say, the ongoing great split between liberal and conservative, left and right, etc. Political splits. That's not going anywhere, and I think it will these kind of divisions will even become maybe more noticeable. The others, we have splits between, say, so-called globalists versus nationalists, and the different countries are taking different approaches to, do they want to integrate more with these kind of international institutions and systems, or are they more prioritizing national sovereignty and so on and so forth? There's that split. And the other one, which I think is also pretty important, is the split between those who want to just dive headlong into this emergent kind of AI ruled society, and people who are resistant to it and are thinking about how they can kind of preserve their own humanity and their sovereignty amid this. So there's also probably going to be a big move of, anti-AI and logging off and touching grass and doing things with your hands, and kind of trying to move back towards a kind of more, let's say, more embodied way of living than this kind of hyper digital, hyper virtual kind of life that we've kind of increasingly found ourselves in, or at least a lot of us have since 2020 and beyond. So yeah, these kind of splits, I mean, I'll be looking out for kind of how these kind of like Gemini splits and bifurcations are going to be expressing themselves over the next couple of years, because I suspect it will be quite noticeable.
Well, and that makes me think about like everybody right now is in their own little digital echo chamber of algorithms just feeding them, things that appeal to them only. And they think that everyone else is like that because they're seeing only that. And then we have AI thrown into the mix, and there's this Neptunian component, right? And so it's kind of like the lines between reality and fantasy and what's going on technologically versus what's actually real and what we can trust that we can see with our own eyes and know that it's actually factual. Like that's all blurred. And so it kind of just makes me think about that, like the bifurcation of like everybody's in their own little fantasy bubble of what they think the world is based on what the algorithms are feeding them and based on what's being regurgitated back to them by AI and all of that. And then we're also getting all of these AI generated like videos, like deep fakes, and there's AI generated content all over YouTube now. And it's like, I think you could be in your own world. And it's so bifurcated that there's like three people that have the exact same worldview as you that have like this same exact algorithm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if that might be, I've been thinking about that, and like, is this something that's going to die down a little bit, or is this basically what Neptune in Aries is going to look like? Because Neptune, if you follow it, it tends to speak to collective cultural trends, things that large numbers of people are getting into at the same time. And if you follow Neptune through the signs, you can see changes to kind of cultural consumption and things of that kind based on the symbology of the signs. We have Neptune in Aries now. We have the exaltation of the sun and the sign of Mars. And it does make me wonder if, to some degree, there can be a kind of a very self-involved kind of aspect to the culture, where AI is, as you say, kind of tailoring things just to you. We already see it with the algorithm. The even deeper and kind of more demented version of that is AI making content that nobody else is going to see. It's just made for you, and it's just designed to entertain you only. And that feels very Aries to me. It's like the content is just purely aimed at you, the self, and you don't even, you can't even share it with others because nobody else has seen this stuff that you're watching.
And they probably wouldn't like it either. It's like
and they
so
wouldn't like it.
to you.
Right, exactly. And people have even made warnings about this, that it could, there's already a lot of, say, AI like adult content coming out as well. And I've seen people warning that what could be done in the not too distant future is that they can kind of have they can attach devices to you that measure your heart rate, different biometrics, and basically the technology can be monitoring you and how you're responding to content. And then the AI can be tailoring that content based on what it knows that you like, because it's scanning you and it can tell.
Oh,
and then it's just creating tailored content that is just designed purely for you and purely to get you off or whatever. And you could imagine that a lot of people could be lost to stuff like this. I mean, it's a little bit, this is an extreme expression of this stuff, but I think given the symbols, Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune in Aries, like it fits, at least symbolically. And when you see people warning of something that fits the astrology, you kind of have to at least flag it as a possibility. It'll be a not very pleasant one.
I don't think it's that far off though, because we have all these wearable devices. Like I'm even wearing an Aura ring right now. Like that could be tracking my heart rate and all these different things that you just said as I'm watching content, and it could tell what I like, what I don't like, all of that. So, I mean, I don't think it's just like, pornographic content that they would do that with. They could do that with anything.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right, of course. I mean, you could imagine that they could be writing, and I don't think we're going to be there for quite a few years, but like Pluto's, we've got 15 years of Neptune in Aries, we've got Pluto in Aquarius, more than 20 years. So like you can imagine, and given how fast things are progressing now, where are things going to be in 5 years, 10 years? And, could it be that they're basically writing TV series kind of on the fly, and it knows you like certain characters, and it knows which ones you don't like, and it just writes them out and kind of
Oh
brings in
my
more that
gosh, yeah.
that you like. I mean, we've seen kind of TV series like that. I was quite into Lost, and I watched almost all of it, and I kind of lost interest in the last season because it all through the various seasons of Lost, you were constantly thinking, are they just making this up as they go along, or do they know where this is going? And
Yeah.
it would
They
get
they
wilder and
clearly
wilder.
didn't know where it was going.
Yeah, right. They clearly didn't know where it was going, and you kind of suspected that, but you kind of wanted to believe that they did. And you can imagine that it's kind of a proof of concept, because then you could probably just have an AI that's just making it up as it goes along. It doesn't know where it's going. It just knows what you're finding entertaining, and it's throwing it at you.
Gosh. That would be so unsatisfying if everything was like that.
Yeah,
There's
I mean,
like
it would be
never a
terrible.
good conclusion.
It would be terrible. I mean, but you'd be extremely entertained the whole time, but then you would not have anything to show for it, and you wouldn't be able to tell anybody else about it, because it'd be like, it's like somebody telling you about a dream they've had. There's not much you can do. You just kind of like, okay, mostly speaking.
Okay. So the future sounds really weird.
Yeah, don't expect that in July. We're getting a bit
This
speculative
is
here.
all coming in July.
Kind of derailed our train of thought a little bit there. Sorry about that.
So kind of like switching gears then. So the thing we haven't talked about yet is the Pluto-Uranus trine component to this, because that is a really harmonious aspect. We have Pluto in Aquarius, we have Uranus in Gemini, air signs. Obviously, this is very technologically driven and technologically oriented. What are your thoughts on what this might be bringing?
This is a really interesting element to this configuration, and probably the one that I feel like I have kind of the least confidence in how it's going to shake out. If you look at Pluto and Uranus together, their conjunctions tend to have to do with like really rapid cultural change and sort of eruptions from beneath the surface of pent up tensions and things like that. It's very revolutionary. And the last Pluto Uranus conjunctions were in the mid 60s. Now, one of the things that came then was the initiation of ARPANET, which eventually became the internet. So there is a technological aspect to this cycle as well, relating to connectivity and the internet and so on. However, as everybody knows about the 60s as well, this was also really a time of great cultural change and ferment. We have the civil rights movement, we have the hippie movement, we have all the anti-war stuff, we have big changes in sexuality and race relations and things of that kind. Those themes are baked into this Pluto-Uranus cycle for sure. And in the early 2010s, they made exact squares from 2012 to 2015. They were in orb for longer than that. And we saw a lot of the same themes coming up in terms of some of the like cultural tensions and battles that were fought over that decade. Again, including race relations and sexuality and women's rights and so forth. Right? We had those same themes coming up in really vivid ways and in a kind of quite tense and friction-ridden way as well. So now we're at the trine, and so it's interesting to see how those themes express themselves again, how they're expressing themselves now, but in perhaps a less rough way than it was expressed in the square period. So yeah, I don't know what you think about that. I'm not too certain as to how this is playing out, but I think some of those themes we're going to see more change in those areas, and you've probably got to factor in technology as well. So like, how is technology being deployed in ways that speak to like identity and all those kind of themes that came up in the 60s.
Okay. And maybe like new developments involving like civil rights and all of these different things that you just talked about that come about in a way that's more like gentle and harmonious, and it sort of just almost like flows naturally with the times, because that would be more of a trine situation.
Right, exactly. So yeah, you could probably expect there are going to be things that are coming out maybe new legislation or movements and so forth that are kind of pushing for the same things, but in, as you say, less combative ways, and the energy of things, the energy of change in those areas is coming more quickly. I wonder if it maybe has to do with the way that the technology that's being deployed kind of deals with these issues, the way that, and this is, again, it's a controversial thing, understandably, but the way that maybe this AI and this technology is used to, let's say, used differently with different groups of people, for example. And there could be something like that, and it can happen perhaps so quickly that, and powerfully, that we don't even quite realize it, because it's just being rolled out as part of these algorithms, and the AI is doing it. So there's not as much friction because people don't even know it's happening. It could be something like that.
That kind of makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else with this configuration that we haven't covered yet that we really need to talk about?
Yeah, the one other theme that we didn't talk about, and which is kind of baked into these cycles to some degree, is this theme of the UFO phenomenon. And I keep bringing this up. It's become my
I figured you would say something.
trademark. Yeah, I can't help myself. But it's a little bit of a pet obsession, so I'm going to bring it up. But not because it's not related to the cycles. It really is. As part of this basket configuration, we have a sextile between Uranus and Neptune. And that takes us back to their conjunctions in 1993. That was the year that the pretty famous ufologist Stephen Greer launched what was called the Disclosure Project, which was basically this project to roll out all these people who've worked in the military or in the government who claim to have had experience working on the UFO topic and know things about what the government knows about that. So I think this theme of kind of institutional, quote unquote, disclosure is baked into this Uranus-Neptune cycle. And it's also baked into the longer Pluto-Neptune cycle as well. And so this is a really slippery topic because it's something that a lot of people believe in. It's something that certain aspects of society push, but then we don't really know what is the reality of it. Like, are there really so-called aliens invading, or is this basically just a kind of a new myth or a new religious tradition that's kind of being pushed into the world for whatever reason at the moment? But you can imagine that belief in aliens is something that can unite everybody across the world, right? It crosses boundaries in that way. And so some people have speculated that part of the reason for this is the reason these messages are pushed is that they might be kind of used to kind of push the idea of a new religion being formed or something like that. Or, it may just be that it's used to kind of distract attention from real secret military projects and kind of advanced technology that the military wants to protect, which is, kind of how they tend to operate with these kind of things. Whatever the truth of it is, the theme is coming up in a big way, I think, at the moment, because we have this sextile between Uranus and Neptune. What's happening right now, we have this Disclosure Day movie has just been released, Spielberg. I haven't watched it myself. I've not heard the best things about it, but it's it's pretty significant, and it's bringing that theme into consciousness. And at the same time, we have the release of all these videos of UFOs by the Trump administration. So I think I'm fairly in agreement with people who don't really kind of buy the sort of official narrative on this kind of thing, and they're a bit suspicious of why this stuff is being put out there. However, it is happening, and it is an important theme, and I don't think it's going away. I do think we're going to hear a lot more about it. And, I can understand some people find it tiresome, but I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think we're going to be hearing more about it, and maybe even getting some understanding of kind of like why it is being put out there in the way that it is. I don't really think we're going to be invaded by aliens or anything like that, but I do think we're going to hear a lot more about this. So I think that's part of this moment in this astrology, and one of the reasons why we'll hear a lot more about that stuff over the next couple of years.
Well, we already are hearing a lot more about it as this is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So it will be interesting to see if in July there is some sort of like major revelation that comes about, because it really does feel like they're building up to it. Like the Disclosure Day movie, like you just mentioned, just came out. They've been, dropping little hints here and there. So maybe they're going to release something that's more than just like a little tiny blob, floating around on a screen.
Yeah, they might do. I mean, I think part of the reason that they've only been releasing these little tiny blobs is that there are factions who don't want this stuff out there, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's arguments going on behind the scenes about which videos to release and which not to release, and so forth. There could be some of that. So it might be that there's kind of forces behind the scenes that don't want anything that's particularly interesting to get out there, and that could be part of what's going on. But it does feel like stuff is building. It's been building for quite some time, and it's something that I've been forecasting for a while. And I think I certainly don't get every prediction right, but I think this is one that I have been on the money about, because we are seeing like official sources putting these videos out. We are seeing another Spielberg movie, and Spielberg has been kind of he's played an important role in the forming of our kind of collective myths and beliefs around this issue with these major movies that he's put out over the years. And now we see another one, which is kind of telling, probably, that I suspect there is going to be, things are going to get more interesting in this area over the next couple of years. And I don't quite know why, but it's coming.
All right. So the next few years look kind of weird. We went in some strange directions here today. Is there anything that you want to leave us with before we sign off?
I don't think there's too much more to say about this. I'm a bit on the fence as to kind of how dramatic this is going to be. It's very rare astrology, but is it just kind of because what's emerging now is very rare? I mean, again, coming back to AI, say what you like about it, but now we have these machines that can just answer any question you want. And that's kind of weird, and it's kind of magical. And again, even if you don't like it, you have to admit it's ingenious. It's certainly significant. It's like this civilization that we're living in has come out with these extremely intelligent machines that can solve all these kind of problems and do all this sort of work for you. And that is very kind of like once in a few thousand years stuff. So I'd caution against expecting like great fireworks. There might be, but even just looking at where we are now, what we're seeing is already weird and different enough to warrant astrology of this kind, in my opinion.
Thank you, Dan, so much for coming back here and talking about the crazy astrology in July and Barbault's Basket with us. This has been super fun. We'll definitely have to do it again soon. And I know a lot of our viewers are going to want to know where they can find you. So where can they find your videos, your membership, book readings, all of that?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, Heather. It's been super fun, as usual. I'd love to come back sometime and go on extended rambles about Lost and things like that. But you can find me at World Astrology Report on YouTube, and I'm writing a Substack series as well called The Hermetic Age, which you can find at worldastrologyreport.substack.com. That's basically where you can find me right now.
Perfect. And I will link all of that down below. And thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like the video, share it with a friend if you found it valuable, and subscribe, of course. And we'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.